Welcome to the Transformative Studio podcast, a place for conversations with compassionately sensitive people sharing practical and spiritual wisdom to help you navigate through this life with greater ease and awareness. I am Raphaelle Serena Cox, founder of the Transformative Studio, and I passionately believe we can experience deeper transformation when we open up to an honest practice of self-inquiry. So welcome everybody to this week's episode, and I'm delighted to say that today I'm joined by April, and she's going to share with us a little bit about herself and her work. So welcome, April.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I'm excited. So just a little bit about my background. So since 2016, I've been working with people in groups for holistic and intuitive healing sessions. So it's more of, helping them identify ways that they can heal themselves. And it's been an exciting journey. And, prior to that, I was actually a recruiter, which, a job placement recruiter looking for talent. I've been doing that since 1999. And little did I know at the time, all of that experience working with people and using my intuition throughout that would help me in this work here. So yes, I'm just excited to, have this conversation go wherever it needs to go.
Yeah, this is it. It was lovely when we got together to sort of share the idea of having a chat. And I think that's the beauty sometimes when you work in sort of healing arenas, that you do have that grounding in a more sort of corporate business sort of world that sort of helps you interact with the sort of everyday grassroots, grounded level of people's awareness, abilities, skills. I found that personally myself, that it was a good sort of entry point, because it's a real referencing, isn't it, that you can use then moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially with things that tend to be like life-changing decisions. So if it's a job and you're changing jobs, and I had the opportunity to work within different industries, so scientific, engineering, IT, executive search. So I really got a broad aspect, or worked with a broad spectrum of people, which was just very informative, and it helps me today with the work that I do. And yeah, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, of course, but reflecting back, I'm like, oh, that's why I was doing that for so long. And it just teaches you to, probe in the right direction and ask some good questions. And you really get to learn about people and what motivates them to make decisions, or what could possibly be holding them back from success. And so that also goes hand in hand with ways that they can heal themselves. So it's a very, very valuable experience that I didn't think would translate into the role that I'm doing now.
Yeah. So how did you find that sort of shift or step change? Was it gradual from moving from that role into a more sort of guided healing role, or did something happen for you personally, or what?
Well, yeah. So, I've always been interested in alternative ways to heal. And so in 2007, actually, just kind of on the side, but it doesn't sound like it's something on the side, my husband and I opened up a spa for wellness. And I always did the recruiting alongside of it. And so that started the journey a bit there. And then, I kind of got away from it a little bit. And then in 2016, I actually had some, I guess you could call them, I guess they'd be traumatic losses within 6 weeks of each other. So my dad and my uncle, that was like my brother. And so what happened at that time was I really felt I thought that I was, becoming even more introverted and losing my mind, because I was hearing things, I was seeing things that I just didn't understand. And so that just caused me to explore that a little bit further, when earlier on in my life, my whole life, I've had kind of signs or indications that I could use my intuition in better ways than I was, or even use it consciously, because I wasn't using it consciously then. And I just ignored it because I was afraid of what I would see or hear. Right. So I would block that out, block that out, block that out. And then in 2016, there was no blocking it out. I think I don't know, higher self was just like, okay, it's definitely time to, get to what you should be doing and need to be doing here and this time in this space right now. So that's what happened. And it was, certainly went through the whole dark night of the soul thing. I can relate to that, and going through it, what feels like alone. And so that experience is really what changed things for me. And I think the healing modalities that I learned, like professionally learned, they were in a certain order. And then I went through various levels through different modalities because it's what I needed at that time, but it was all perfectly aligned. It seemed a little chaotic at the time, but again, when you look back, you're like, oh, that's perfect. If I didn't do that, if I didn't go there, I wouldn't be here. So, that was really just the thing that I think it wasn't necessarily so subtle in 2016 for me. It was kind of like, boom, this is what we're doing. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey since. Yeah.
I think sometimes those situations, unfortunately it was, under tragic circumstances for yourself, but it's still, sometimes it's the arresting nature of these events in life, isn't it, that makes you sort of just really, I don't want to use the word wake up because that sounds even less appropriate, but like you said, you had these feelings, these callings, these visions or information coming to you, and you were pushing it away. And I think sometimes we have to have situations that sort of come right up in our faces to go, okay, I do understand now that this is just not background noise here. This is something I should be tuning into. So can you share with us just a little bit about that sort of intuitive skill or ability? But what does that actually mean for you in particular?
So at first, it was just things that I would hear. So it was like a clairaudience, right? So I would hear things and I'd say, oh, that's just me in my head, or that's kind of how it started. And then I started to dream, and then my dreams were things that were in the now happening. And then my dreams were things that were accurate. So I think probably the time where I experienced the most, I guess, sensations or feelings or knowingness was just before going to sleep and just waking up in the morning. That's how it started. And it would be things like, I would hear my best friend, her sister passed away at, like 10 years ago. And one night I felt like she wouldn't let me go to sleep, not in a harmful way, but I'm like, am I going crazy? Like, is that just me? And then she was saying things and I was seeing things. And when I see things, I see them as what I would equate to a live photograph. So if you have an Apple iPhone, the live photo has like 3 to 5 seconds of like a little video clip. That's how I see things typically, in these short little clips. And so the next morning I heard her again and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I picked up the phone and I called my best friend and I said, this is going to sound really crazy. I promise you I haven't lost my mind, but I have to say this to you. And I shared something with her, and it was something like little about moving a dresser in her room or something at her parents' house. And my best friend was like, oh my gosh, like there's no way that you could have known that. Like, and there was like 3 or 4 things. And I'm like, I don't know, please don't ask me any more questions. I was like, I just don't know right now. So I started to work through that a bit, and I had to work on boundaries. So that was, the lesson for that, because once that's kind of open and you realize and you have that external validation that what you're hearing isn't you being crazy, right? Or what you're feeling or sensing or what you see isn't crazy, then you're like, okay, wow, this is real. And then it's just kind of like, well, what should I pay attention to and what shouldn't? Because understanding that, there's various forms of interference that we have to discern and navigate through. But then when I started, so I got through some of those lessons that were, I would feel like trial by fire, or it was just like, I felt like I was thrown into the fire because some things were so like, wow. But again, I'm glad that they happened because I learned a lot from them. And then it evolved to more of when I start to work with, whether it's in a one-on-one session or whether it's in a group. So right now I felt like I've been working with a lot of groups versus one-on-one. And I think it's just because there's this dominant resonant frequency or this dominant resonant issue that could be beneficial for the group. So, but sometimes when I'll start to work with someone, I'll sometimes when I inhale and I'm just, just settling and just kind of listening for what's going on, sometimes I can feel if they have a wobble in their field, and I don't intentionally set out to look for certain things. I'm just like, whatever I'm supposed to hear, see, feel comes through. And then sometimes it does translate into the physical sensation. So if someone had like a finger injury, which that was one of my lessons, was I felt someone's finger injury. It was a remote session. It was a finger injury, and when the session was closed, my finger was still hurting really badly. So that was the lesson in, recognizing, not registering people's stuff. And so it's all been by what I would feel like. It kind of feels like I learned the hard way, but not really. In the moment, it felt very kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what to do. But then after the fact, you're just like, oh my gosh, that was a wonderful lesson. Thank you. So it's kind of all ways, and I don't choose the way it comes. It just comes however I think I could interpret it the best to help someone.
Yeah, because I have heard you can sort of ask if it's not an appropriate way for you to have it sort of slightly tweaked so it's more in line with the way you like to receive information. So, but it sounds like you're getting really comfortable with all the ways, and just whatever's in that moment, you're trusting that you're conveying that back to the group or the individual.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm cautious to say that, because just when I feel like, oh, I'm good, something else comes my way that I is my next, I guess, step in the training. So, but yeah, so far, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that you say that you're being drawn to work with groups as well, because I do think there is such a collective consciousness that moves through soul groups, people that gather together, and sometimes you wonder why you've crossed paths with people, and then suddenly you've all got, as you use that word, resonancy, that they're all working with that same frequency, and therefore it's the power of the group is then amplified, and then the healing is amplified. I mean, is that something you find yourself?
Definitely, like, for sure, and especially recently. So previously I would do the one-on-ones and the groups intentionally. I would just say, oh, whoever shows up to the group, those are the people that need to show up. But when I'm doing individual sessions, so if I have someone reach out to me, and this has happened the last 5 sessions, I have someone reach out and say, hey, can we have a session? And, just see what comes up, and I'll tune in, and then I'll see some things, but then it will be like, then I'll get the guidance to where this is not just for this person. Right. And then I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. And then I feel like I'm in a crowded room, and I'm like, oh, interesting. So it just kind of goes that way. And that's happened the last 5 times. And again, I just let it go to whatever, and I go with it, and I trust and allow now. And it seems to be, helpful. I just thought it was interesting how it's kind of changed recently to more of that group type of feel, and I've been drawn to certain locations, which is interesting. We've always traveled, but when I go certain places, there's certain groups in those places. So I was in Colorado a few months ago, and it took me 2 days to get used to Colorado, which I'd been to that exact location many, many times, no issues at all. But when I was there a few months ago, it was almost like I had opened an oven door and I couldn't breathe. Like, it was very interesting, but come to find out later, it was actually some type of group thing. And then I was able to breathe again. And so it's just, I don't know, it's very cool journey.
So when you're in Colorado, was that for a work reason, or was that for sort of pleasure, and you just happened to be around this group that you had a real sort of...
Yeah, it was actually, we were visiting family, and it was a last minute vacation, meaning we planned the trip bought the ticket 4 days prior to departure. It was very, very last minute. And we happened to look online. There was a nonstop flight. It was like $89. It was just crazy inexpensive. And we're like, why wouldn't we go visit family if, for 4 or 5 days? And then the last one was actually Tulum, Mexico. The day, Christmas Day, my husband was like, well, I was going to get us a trip to Tulum. And I'm like, Tulum? And it had come up on, like, I'd seen a video about Tulum and I read an article just that week, and it had never come up on my radar before. So I was like, well, we're definitely going. And so I called, and then the flights were like, the whole thing was really inexpensive. And we went, and I had a similar experience there. It was different, but it seems to be the ones that are like these spontaneous trips. And it's just, and it's always in a group, a different kind of, and each group feels different. But something happens there for a large number of energies, I would say.
So are you opening up a healing at that point? Or is it just your interaction, just how does it work for you? Is it?
Yeah. So, well, in Colorado, I knew I could physically feel something was really, really dense and intense. And I didn't have that same feeling in Mexico, but in Colorado, I intentionally got into a session just myself, and was just like, what's happening here? Just show me what's happening here. And a lot of what it was it was like a bridge type session, helping a large amount of what I felt like were souls. Like it was like this huge tunnel, and I just saw a lot of like orange and just weird things. But you could get the feeling that they were souls that just needed some type of assistance. And it was just, I don't know. And it lasted a bit longer than I thought it was going to last. But it felt really good, and it felt a lot lighter. So let me back up a little bit. So I don't know if, like, I feel like this has something to do with it. But the night before, I had a dream of a door like this, like those doors that go into mountains that have the, maybe like the coal carts on them, like this metal door. And it just felt really weird. And I went inside that door, and I saw a bunch of like bodies and stuff. And I was like, oh, weird. And then I woke up the next day, like, I didn't know if just it was some type of interference or something. Well, the next morning, again, a spontaneous hike comes up the next morning. My husband's aunt's like, oh, let's go to this particular mountain and, go for a hike. I'm like, sure. It wasn't planned or anything. And not even 5 minutes into the walk, the same exact door that I dreamt of was in that wall, or in that mountain, like along this wall. And I just had this overwhelming, this overwhelming feeling. And then later that day, it felt like maybe I needed those little clues, and then maybe that helped me along. But that's what it felt like there. And then in Mexico, it's different. As I was going to sleep, I was doing my, evening meditation before I fell asleep. And then all of a sudden I feel all of this stuff pop up. And it was the largest group I had ever seen. And I felt like the whole thing got kicked, because we were on an oceanfront resort. And I felt like the whole covered the whole entire surface of the ocean that I could see in every direction. And I felt like it was just various different types of energies. And it wasn't necessarily as heavy as Colorado was. Like Colorado was like heavy and painful. And Tulum wasn't so much pain as Colorado, but it was certainly just a different type of experience. And it's almost like they needed some type of container or something to help get along to the next step. But so I guess it's kind of long way to answer your question. I guess it's kind of intentional. Like one's intentional, and then one was just my evening meditation stuff started coming up. So
presumably on some level you've agreed to this, because otherwise does it not affect your life? I mean, you can't just walk around constantly clearing up and helping souls move on to the next, without sort of consciously agreeing to this. Is that what you feel? Is that? part of your
I
journey?
feel like I must have, right? Well, I feel like I do on a certain level because my intention is to be of service in whatever capacity um, that I'm able to, and that's, necessary, and that's also in a fair and balanced way for me here too, right? So that's always my intention, and it's come at times to where I could work with them, and it doesn't consume the whole experience, right? It only maybe takes up a few hours of an experience here and there if I had to total it all together. So yeah, and I mean, I definitely have agreed. I think I've agreed to it, but I just don't know the details of the agreement until I get into it.
Right. And so did you feel that this was something you had from a very young age, that perhaps you just didn't understand it? Or is this something you think has come in later on in your life?
Now, I think definitely from a young age, but more pronounced as a teenager, meaning my dreams would be very vivid and very just accurate with things that weren't even significant. Like I would have a dream about the car that I got when I was 16, but I would have like I wasn't working. I didn't have a way for somebody to buy that for me. Like I didn't know, and just little things like that were seemingly insignificant. Like, oh, that's kind of weird, right? Or, just little signs like that as a teenager. But as a child, I was like an adult child. I felt like I was this grown up person just waiting for this human body to grow up so I could get out and do like my own thing. Meaning like I remember like looking at adults like, oh my gosh, like, why would you do that? That's ridiculous. But also I was born into, so my parents didn't raise my brother or I, and my grandparents actually did. So there was there wasn't a lot of like attentive parenting for us, which was good because we kind of like raised ourselves in a way. But I definitely felt older. I never felt like a little kid, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
Like I don't
completely.
know how to explain that really,
Mm,
but yeah, it's kind of.
yeah. So but do you feel that life has got easier for you now that you've opened up into this? And I know you have several sort of healing modalities under your belt. And so which do you feel that you're most drawn to? I mean, I know you use your intuitive guidance a lot, but is there one sort of form of healing modality that seems to really resonate with you and those who you work with?
I would say I often lead with the divine healing modality. And then as a beginning structure, because I feel like people are able to grasp it a little bit easier than perhaps some of the others. So I started with biomagnetism, which requires muscle testing, like you muscle testing a person, right? And I would use their feet as indicators of, yes and no or whatever. And then I can also do that remotely using myself as a proxy, muscle testing using myself. But when I get into the biomagnetism of it, I feel like a lot of times people are like really in their head and mental, like, how does, she's asking questions in her head and my feet are moving. She's not saying anything and these things are coming up. So but I feel like I had to learn that way to, I guess, prove to myself that like that works. Like I can ask a question and get a response. And I mean, it's not my body, it's their body, right? And things are coming up. And then I would get the feedback and say, hey, does this make sense? Or I would ask questions that I don't even know where the questions came from. And they're like, yes, exactly. And I'm like, oh, wow. So I feel like I had to learn that way. And I can feel what would resonate the best for that particular person. But I would say divine healing probably is the go-to for every session, just because it's easy. I think it's a little bit easier for people to wrap their minds around it in a first session type thing. If you're not getting to, just if you'll, like, as as a practitioner, the things that you can say out loud and the things that what's best for them to understand, just meeting them where they're at and helping them figure out the ways that they can heal themselves. So yeah.
I do totally agree, actually, because the divine healing does give the power back to them to sort of own what they're feeling, because I think that's the thing, isn't it, a lot of the time, because this is why I was just mindful of the way you were conducting your life and how things are just sort of coming at you and around you and sort of suddenly becoming this portal of activity. And I think it's so important that we stay grounded in our own being, and we feel very empowered to heal ourselves and go at a pace that's right for us, with the timings that feel right. And I think that's the beauty of divine healing, because it's very much about the individual and learning that it's up to them to decide how far they take things and at what pace. Because I think sometimes, because we're such multi-layered beings, aren't we, that sometimes there's part of us that feels really, really ready to release something and let go. But there's other parts of us that are really hanging on and just, fearful and wrapped up with sort of conditioning or imprinting. And there's almost like this internal battle that goes on, let alone the healer, therapist, coach, mentor, whatever you want to describe yourself as, is guiding and holding space for. You've got this sort of real internal sort of mix of dynamics happening. And I think that if the individual can feel and stay with themselves for long enough, then that sort of level of healing is much more permanent. And I know we use the term sort of as layers of an onion, you're peeling that away and it's getting deeper and deeper. And sometimes people can move very, very fast through their trauma, habits, patterning, conditioning, imprints, whatever it is that is sort of holding them in a space of stuckness, frustration. And other times it just takes a long time. It just, other things need to move into place. And, and I think sometimes my personal experience as well, because we are a collective, that sometimes we do have to move at the collective pace as well as our own individual pace. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic for me. And I think that's probably what you're reflecting on when you say you work with individuals and groups, how, people come to you after a group session and say, oh, can we look at this in more detail? And, they're ready to take that next step. And then there's sort of merit in group work because there's that synergy. And I think sometimes we underestimate the work that we do, both in our work, but also in our personal lives, and how much we're all moving forward to a greater life experience and a better world. But sort of incrementally, when you sit in your own space, you can still feel quite stuck with elements of life, but actually on a collective level, the advancing we're making, it is really quite profound.
Yes, it is. And I agree with you completely. And you said that beautifully, because that's exactly what happens. People do have the opportunity in a healing modality like divine healing to be more empowered, because they're participating a little more, they're energetically participating more so than perhaps in some other types of modalities, like I'm the person doing this on you, when really that's not even how it works anyway, right? They're the ones doing the healing, and you're just the one seeing things for them. And so and I love that piece of it, because it does allow people to, and then it also teaches them, when they're participating energetically, it teaches them how to feel in the body and what this might mean, and breathe through it, and expand into it, and do these different techniques. So they're actually learning tools that they could use later when things come up in their awareness. And so I feel like it's great from that perspective, because it's helping them heal and helping them heal themselves, and then also giving them some tools to walk away with, versus maybe if you were just, laying on a table or had something done to you in a session, or, the participation and the energetic participation is really valuable. And to your point about all of us moving together as a collective, we've made some huge progress, which is exciting. It's an exciting progress. So yeah, I feel like we're on this accelerated timeline.
Yeah, it does feel like it gets really quick sometimes, doesn't it?
Yes. Feels like the fast lane.
Yeah. And so what would you say, reflecting back on sort of the experiences you've had so far in your life so far, has been your biggest sort of lesson of truth that you most sort of hold on to?
I would say, well, I mean, there's a few, but the lesson of truth would be to just, the more that you surrender or let go, the more you're open to receive the actual lessons that are coming your way and have them transform from lessons to actual wisdom. And I only, I try not to have regret, but I'm like, man, I wish I would have listened to myself earlier, because I'd have so much more wisdom now. But it all happens in perfect timing. But to really just trust to trust yourself and your own inner wisdom and your own inner guidance. And then also, one of the things that helps me see truth and realize where you can get accurate truth is just having this observer perspective and just observing the whole thing, trying to remove yourself from any attachment or any emotional attachment, anything that's charging to you. That just helps me see truth. And I just wish that's one of the things that I think is probably one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned, because it helps you see things, as they are, versus through the avenue of an emotion or an emotional charge. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is really a valuable lesson, isn't it? To just accept that everything that's happened, even the things that you think, oh, I wish it had been different, in that very moment, it was just divine, and that was exactly what was needed. And because I always see life as cycles, wheel cycles, just sort of moving round in sort of an aligning flow, that it just comes back and collects you again if you happen to miss it one time round, and it waits for you. It'll come and get you again, and just sort of carry you forward. So I'm learning to know that it's okay, that I made that decision at that time and it felt right. Or sometimes it didn't and I didn't listen, but that was my choice. I knew that difference and I made a decision that didn't align so well with me. But I learned through that too, and nothing is a wasted experience, is it really? I think we all benefit from keep going round in those learning cycles, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look back and I do think that sometimes, I help adjust the perspective by saying, that's not for nothing, right? If I didn't go through that, I wouldn't, have met this person, or I wouldn't have, done this or gone there or acquired this different type of experience that now helps me. But when you start to, especially in the beginning, I was kind of upset with myself, like, why didn't I listen to myself earlier? But it is all perfect, and it does, like you said, and it just scooped me right back up to the next cycle. And here I am.
Yeah, you never get left behind.
No.
So it's been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you, April. And I wonder, we said about we're moving forward as the collective and the world becoming a better place. So for someone that's just sort of listening in and thinking, oh, you know what, I'm not sure I see that, I'm not sure I can feel into that sort of frequency, what would you say to someone that's sort of still just trying to navigate their way through the slightly denser experience of this sort of life we live?
Yeah. So what I say to people that feel that way is just, as hard as it is, try to remove yourself from the particular situation, or, just what's happening. Either if it helps for you to take a mountaintop view, pretend you're on top of a mountain and looking down at the whole thing and you're just not attached to it anyway, or if you would prefer to be a bird in the sky and be an eagle or something looking down, to just really encourage people to just do what they can in a way that's right for them, but be consistent with trying to just remove yourself and really be the observer and just the compassionate observer, or try to find compassion for, the whole entire situation 360. Now, that doesn't happen in one go for everyone. So people will sometimes have to do that, day after day after day, but just spending a few moments trying to do that does adjust you, it adjusts your frequency, it adjusts your perspective, and intentionally, because I don't think we realize how powerful, or a lot of us don't realize how powerful our intention is. So if we intend to pull in, maybe unconditional love or compassion, even in a time that seems like it's impossible, it actually does make a difference. And even though it's an incremental change, it's a change in the right direction. And it's very, it feels very freeing, like you slowly free yourself, depending on the pace you want to go. But I try to keep it as simple as possible without overcomplicating it. But those are some things that have proven successful for some people that I've worked with, and including myself. It's not easy, but the attempt matters.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable and sage advice, to just sort of keep it, even if it's just for a few moments, fleeting moments of trying to be that eagle or that detached observer. Because I think sometimes when you're in the heart of something that is very, very raw and very painful, you just can't even find your way out of the energy of it to become detached and sort of removed. But I even sometimes, for me, I take like a physical step back in the space I'm standing in, just to sort of get a different perspective, just that sheer physical movement of just stepping back, it's quite a nice sort of moment of shift. Even if nothing quite settles at the time, you still get that pause from the intensity of something. And I think over time, like you've already said, sharing with the breath, using that element, and then suddenly you can get this sort of detached, removed, whether it's back or up, looking down, and it's just a consistency, isn't it? It's just because we're creatures of habit. I think we very quickly link into ways of doing things, and if we're not careful, they're very default ways, and they're often not the best way, but though we've either learned it through younger years or those around us, and sometimes we thrive doing it differently. And it's sort of really getting to know yourself, isn't it? And just thinking, what does work for me, and just sitting with yourself so much more than just sort of this outward facing being in life and the fast lane or the busyness of it, and just sort of turning that inward reflection.
Yes, absolutely. I love the way you said that. I love that step back. I'm probably going to try that now.
Yeah. This is the thing. This is why I love having these conversations. And I set up the podcast because, it's in our sharing together. We're all on this journey together. None of us have got the answers. We're actually just all in it together, trying these things out, holding space, and just sort of interacting. And I think, it's a great opportunity to just try these things out. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And you just let go of what doesn't work for you and just embrace something that is working. So, so thank you so much, April. And what I'll do is I'll leave your link of all your website and your, I know you offer lots of webinars and things that people can join into. And I'll put those links on the show notes below. And it would be lovely to, stay in touch and come back and maybe have another chat, because it's been a real pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our chat today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Transformative Studio podcast. I'm Raphaelle Serena Cox. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who will be inspired by the conversation, please share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out more, please visit thetransformativestudio.com.